Today we have a full number of issues to deal with, and we will start. We don't have a quorum, but we'll begin.
We do.
Oh, we do?
3 out of 5.
Oh, right, we do have a quorum. I forget how small the committee is. Let's take the roll now.
Ruskin?
Here.
Caballero? Gilmore?
Here.
Huffman? Silva?
Here.
All right. May I have a motion to move the consent calendar? With the stipulation that we have removed the item under Department of Resources Recycling and Recovery, item 1, the implementation of SB 63. We're removing that. We will not consider it today.
Make a motion.
There's a motion. Is there a second? Please call the roll.
Ruskin? Ruskin?
Yes.
Caballero? Gilmore? Huffman? Silva?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm back. I'm not awake yet.
Okay. All right, that passes, and we'll keep it open. This brings us to item 0540, issue 1, an oversight issue dealing with bond financing for resources programs. As you all know, given the budget and especially the cash flow situation, the use of bond funds for resources programs becomes a very important source of revenue. Over $1 billion of the proposed 2010-11 resources and environmental budget is dependent on general obligation bond funding for things like flood protection, planning, water and other capital infrastructure, local grants for land conservation and habitat preservation. We want to pay close attention now and in upcoming hearings to how these bonds will roll out, toward what realistic expectations we can have about the use of bond funds for our resources projects. We're going to have 2 panels. Panel 1 will update us on the current status of affairs of resources general obligation bonds, and then Panel 2 will update us on the impacts of the cash shortage on our non-state partners. One other word about this okay. One other word about the oversight nature of the looking at the bonds. There's going to be a greater effort this year under what has been termed the reform package within the legislature to do much more oversight in every committee, whether it's a policy committee or a budget subcommittee. I think we in this committee have done a pretty good job of doing oversight over the years, but we will focus even more than we have in the past on oversight. And with that, I would ask Secretary Snow to begin. I know you're going to start with some broad thoughts about the Resources Department.
Thank you, Chair Ruskin, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to make a few very brief comments to you, given that you have a very busy agenda today. Despite what you may have heard, I enjoyed appearing before you when I was director of the Department of Water Resources. I think it's a good interaction, and actually the discussion that we've had in budget has helped to frame policy many times. I wanted to extend my commitment as...
What was it you thought I heard?
No. I think we've always enjoyed a good interaction, and as the budget has gotten tighter, I think it's even more and more important that we connect policy and budget as effectively as we can. I want to make a commitment to work with you with a great deal of candor on how we move forward. As you know, there's a very diverse cross-section of departments, boards, commissions, and councils within the Natural Resources Agency. More than 2/3 of the budget of the Natural Resources Agency is non-general fund or not related to the general fund. a couple of the priorities I'll just lay out.
Apparently, the mics are not working.
And I won't repeat all the incredibly insightful things for the record that I just said. People in the audience are saying, did I miss something? I'll only outline a few of what I consider to be incredibly important natural resource issues this year. Certainly the effort to inciting renewable energy facilities is a critical issue, not only for emissions issues and our future power structure, but also how we treat the environment and make sure we permit facilities effectively and efficiently. Ocean protection is a major issue for the state. One of California's assets, of course, is its coastline. If we don't implement programs to protect that coastline and protect the quality of the environment in the ocean, then the entire state suffers from that. Certainly, the legislature, as well as the governor, has highlighted the Bay Delta system as a critical priority, and that was witnessed by the package of bills that were passed late last year, and that will continue to be one of my priorities. Flood management continues to be a priority. We don't think about flooding when we have drought conditions, but as soon as we're out of drought conditions, we often have flooding. We need to proceed not only with a greater level of flood protection, but do it in a fashion that actually increases riverine habitat. Final thing I'll mention that's a cross-cutting issue, there's a lot of attention on climate change from the mitigation standpoint, implementation of AB 32. The Resources Agency is particularly focused on the issue of climate change adaptation, recognizing that the climate does change, it changes the hydrology, it changes ecosystems, and we need to be able to respond to that, and that's an issue that cuts across many of our programs. So again, given the length of your agenda today, I'll curtail any other comments and just indicate I look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you. Please begin.
Good morning. I'm Blake Fowler with the Public Finance Division of the State Treasurer's Office. Thank you for inviting me to provide an update on the state's general obligation bond program. I provided a handout for you. I'm going to be going through those slides. I thought it'd be helpful to first review the roles of the various state departments in bond financing, particular to the general obligation bond program. The Department of Finance is responsible for prioritizing project needs among the various general obligation bond acts and determines which bond acts and departments receive funding from bond sales. State Treasurer's Office is responsible for preparing, marketing, and issuing bonds to fund project needs. And then we also work with the departments in the Department of Finance to make sure that the projects that are proposed to be funded pass muster from a tax law standpoint. The departments are responsible for administering the bond funds and approving disbursements. The State Controller's Office processes and tracks bond expenditures and ensures a proper accounting treatment of bond funds. And as you mentioned, certainly the legislature has an oversight role, and for many bond acts must appropriate bond funds. Next slide I've provided shows the state's credit ratings on various types of debt the state issues. You'll see on the chart on the right how our credit ratings stack up against the 9 other most populous states. You can see we're at the bottom, which is not surprising because we have the lowest credit rating of any state in the United States. Our most recent credit rating downgrade was in January when Standard & Poor's downgraded us to A-.
Yes, Mr. Silva.
Who meets with the rating agencies?
The State Treasurer's Office, the Department of Finance, and the Controller's Office meets with them frequently and provides them with frequent updates.
And frequently, like twice a year?
These days, it's almost weekly.
Wow. We're in that bad of shape.
No, it's just that at this time of the year, there's a lot of actions happening with the budget, and they are asking for an update.
Okay.
As of February 1st, the state had $82.7 billion of outstanding long-term debt. That consists of general obligation bonds, lease revenue bonds, economic recovery bonds, and the bonds that were issued for make local governments whole for the Prop 1A borrowing. In 2009, we sold a total of $36.6 billion of both short-term and long-term debt in the public capital markets. It included about $20 billion of general obligation bonds, $8.8 billion of short-term revenue anticipation notes, $3.4 billion of economic recovery bonds, which refunded previously issued bonds, and approximately $1.9 billion of bonds to make local governments whole for the borrowing of their property tax revenues. In this slide that I provided, you'll see the result of our issuance. When you exclude the debt issued by banks under the federal temporary liquidity guarantee program, California ranked as the largest issuer of long-term debt in the country among all municipal and corporate bond issuers, and that's just counting our general obligation bonds. So focusing on the general obligation bond program in 2009, we issued a total of $20.48 billion, including the $19.74 billion that was issued on a public basis, and an additional $736 million that was purchased directly by public agencies. $8 billion of that $20 billion was issued as Build America bonds, which are a new type of bonds authorized to the federal government, where the state sells taxable bonds for projects that would have otherwise qualified for tax-exempt financing, and in return receives a 35% interest rate subsidy. The chart at the bottom of this slide shows the major categories of infrastructure project that were funded from our sales. The top three are education, transportation, and environment, and natural resources. You can see the largest share of the $20.48 billion, $5.6 billion, went to repayment of construction loan advances. That's our bond proceeds that were used to repay loans from the pooled money investment account and short-term commercial paper that provided funding in advance of bond sales. So if you subtract the $5.6 billion from the $20.48 and the amount that we issued for refunding bonds, a total of $14.2 billion in new money went to infrastructure projects in 2009. Despite that extraordinary amount of issuance last year, as of February 1st, the state still had $47.48 billion of authorized but unissued general obligation bonds and $10.2 billion of Public Works Board lease revenue bonds that have been authorized by the legislature. The largest category of unissued bonds is in the transportation area at $23.7 billion, followed by natural resources and environment at 9.6 and education at 8.7 billion.
May I ask a question on this?
Sure.
Regarding the $47.48 billion of authorized but unissued bonds, how much has been appropriated?
I don't have that figure.
Mr. Chair and members, Mark Newton with Legislative Analyst Office. Just to answer that question in terms of the resources area, since 1996, there are roughly $21 billion of GO bonds that have been approved by the voters. In terms of what has been appropriated or committed, including the governor's proposals for the budget year, it's roughly $18 billion, which leaves about $3 billion for future appropriation. So just to put into context, Mr. Fowler mentioned that there's $9 billion of unissued. That's certainly correct, but the amount of appropriations is leaves a lot less available for future appropriation.
For our purposes.
For resources purposes, that's correct.
Thank you.
And Brian Dewey, Department of Finance. I want to note that the Finance right now is working with the various agencies and collecting that information to, as I'll allude to later, trying to determine the various priorities for existing, new, and also future funding for bond projects.
In 2010, during the first 6 months, we anticipate issuing $4 to $7 billion of general obligation bonds. We sold $2.5 billion of tax-exempt GO bonds last week, and I'm going to briefly go through that in a minute. We anticipate selling another approximately $2 billion of taxable and Build America bonds next week, and we may have additional sales in April or May. In the fall, tentative plans call for up to $7 billion of issuance. We frequently get asked why we don't issue bonds on a more frequent basis, and one of the reasons for that is that there are periods of time during the year related to budget events that require us to not sell bonds while we're updating our disclosure. The first period starts at the beginning of December, ends after the governor's budget is released on January 10th. Second period begins at the end of April, concludes when the May revision is released, and then in the summertime, if there is the budget is not enacted by June 30th, we have to wait to sell until the budget is enacted. And then once those events are over, it takes a certain period of time to update our financial disclosure, which is quite extensive. So those are periods of time when we're not able to sell bonds.
So in summation, you'd characterize those time periods as periods where the budget is about to be revised?
Yes.
Or it is late?
Yes.
Okay.
So, as I mentioned, last week we sold $2.5 billion of tax-exempt bonds. Of that amount, $1.16 billion will be allocated to various bond acts that are resources and environment related. It makes up, a variety of bond acts: Prop 50, 1E, 40, Prop 12, and others. So again, that was $1.1 billion of the $2.5 billion will go to resources and environment-related bond acts. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions before we turn to finance? Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Isn't it, if I'm correct, are we paying about a 1.5% more for the bonds than because of our poor credit rating? Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, because of our credit rating, our credit spreads compared to AAA-rated municipals is fairly significant, increases our cost of borrowing.
Thank you.
What was the mood, what's been the mood most recently as you've been selling bonds, releasing bonds?
We had a successful sale last week. We were able to reduce interest rates compared to what we thought we were going to be able to get, and we're able to upsize the sale from $2 billion to $2.5 billion. Part of the reason for that is there has not been a lot of supply in the tax-exempt bond market because of the Build America bonds, and so we came with a lot of supply, and there was quite a bit of demand for it.
Please, finance.
Sure, yeah. I'd like to start by going back to page 1 of the slides provided by Treasurer's Office. I just want to make a couple clarifications here. First of all, while the Department of Finance does transmit the priorities to the Treasurer's Office, we work within the overall administration. This is not a unilateral finance decision. We work with members of the cabinet, Secretary Snow and others, to make sure that the bond projects are funded. The top priorities are funded each time we have sales. I should also note that the Treasurer's Office role, in addition to the bullets here, they also determine the size. I mean, it's partly as a reaction to the market conditions and their view of the market conditions and how it may impact future and even past deals, rather. But they're the ones that determine the appropriate size to be sold for each sale. In addition, they determine, in addition to how much is sold, but what types of bonds are sold. And you probably heard us talking about the different types here. There's the regular tax-exempt bonds, the standard issue we've been doing for years. There's the pure taxable. These are projects that loans and such that that don't qualify from a tax perspective as tax-exempt bonds, and also the newer mode of bonds, the Build America bonds. We have any number of different types of projects within the state, and some projects qualify for different types of bonds. So to the extent a bond offering is going to be Build America bonds or taxable, or even or tax exempt for that matter, we may not be able to fund priority projects with those bonds. So as they determine what types of bonds are sold, we take that information into account and then add those projects that are appropriate for those types of bonds.
What is the general, how do you generally characterize, what qualifies in general bonds from being taxable or non-taxable?
I would defer that question to the Treasurer's Office to answer.
There are a couple bond acts that we typically have to issue on a taxable basis for. The largest one is for housing programs where loans are being made to private entities. At this point, we're having to sell a lot of the bonds for Prop 71, the Stem Cell Research Bond Act, as taxable. Loans are particularly difficult when you have private parties to do on a tax-exempt basis.
Thank you.
Okay. So, for example, this first sale was sold as a tax-exempt offering. And when we look at prioritization, it's not just the one bond issue that we're looking at. It's really the whole cycle of the spring, because we know from discussing with the Treasurer's Office that the next offering is going to be taxable and Build America bonds. So we take a look in the first sale is we know we can't sell certain types of projects in each sale, and so we try to, amongst the two sales, or possibly three, work our priorities. But the last sale, as Blake Fowler had said, we issued $2.5 billion, and of that, $923 million was to fund existing projects through December of 2010. And $1.6 billion was to start new projects, including a total of $392 million for various departments within the Resources Agency. And he's also mentioned there's a second sale planned for this price next week, and we look to fund more existing and new projects as well. We're in mid-February. The Department of Finance surveyed all departments in the state to identify cash needs for all existing, new, and future projects. And we are currently analyzing the departmental surveys for these upcoming bond sales. And we're working on developing policies and procedures that will make the prioritization and planning process for bond-funded projects less cumbersome and more predictable for those involved in the process. We hope to have some more information on this process later this spring. And that would be going forward not just for the spring sales, but fall and beyond, so the folks out there planning projects can have a sense of predictability and also assurances that bond funds will be available for projects when they're underway.
Some questions. In terms of evaluating bond projects that you've been doing, will continue to do, one of the priorities, I understand, is job growth. The impact of a project upon jobs. When you do this, what kind of metrics are you using? Are you using well-developed, hard metrics in determining the impact on jobs? What kind of metrics?
Yeah, I'd like to say we do, but it's very difficult to measure jobs from projects. But one of the ideas is you have shovel-ready projects, and those are the types of projects that will get out right away and create jobs sooner. Although it may not be necessarily more. Usually dollar for dollar projects for the most part will create similar amounts of jobs, with the exception of certain acquisition type projects. But one of the big the top priorities for us has been to manage our existing obligations. We don't want to run a situation again where we can't pay our bills. We want to be able to finish the projects we have underway, and so our first priority is to make sure those projects are funded. Once we take care of those projects, then we move down to the new projects, and then there's several criteria such as job creation, health and safety, leveraging of non-state funds. Those are the types of things we're looking at. But we also work very closely with the agencies and the departments to have them identify which projects are highest priority.
Sometimes there's a tendency to believe that there will be highest job creation, for example, in transportation funds, whereas perhaps an analysis could show that bond funds spent on certain resources projects might have equal or more impact on jobs. Do you have you engaged in an analysis in that regard, so that to be sure that resources projects don't unfairly get left behind in the mix simply due to assumptions about impact rather than facts about impact?
Right. We're currently, as I mentioned, we're looking at the surveys completed by departments, and we're working very closely with them to try to identify those priorities that should be funded first. We're in the process of doing that. We should have more information here later this spring on what those priorities are, what our analysis is, and what projects will be essentially be the highest priority.
Well, so in order for us to really do oversight, it's important for us to understand how you're making decisions, not merely what decisions you make.
Right, and that's our goal with this whole process, is to make it more transparent to everyone what those decision points are. What criteria are we using to make decisions on bond funded projects?
As you go forward, starting from now forward, I would appreciate it if you would work closely with staff so that we can understand and even provide you some input in methods of evaluating. We can understand yours and give you input on evaluation of impacts and which bonds are maybe most deserving.
Right. I should note that since the bond freeze went into effect, we've sold roughly $21 billion worth of bonds, and most departments, if not all departments, have gotten large amounts of bonds to get projects going. Obviously it took us a while to switch from a back end funded project funding to a front end, but the March and April we basically had to fund all these projects that were in the hopper, and so it took us a while to catch up. But we started with the November sale, getting some new projects started. Again this spring, like I said, $1.6 billion was released to start new projects, and we continue to work to not only fund our existing obligations but to start new projects, and hopefully this backlog of need can be worked through, and part of it's dependent upon how the market receives us and how we're able to issue bonds over the next few cycles.
Yeah. Thank you.
Question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe you can clarify something for me. I'm a little confused here. My understanding is on the non-public safety resources bond programs are facing a situation where the cash flow has been actually virtually shut off. But if I hear you correctly, you're saying that we have $392 million available with the sale on this?
Correct, to start new projects within the resources area, and that would be spread amongst the various departments.
Okay.
There was additional funding, I think roughly $90 million from the November sale also for resources. This would be non-DWR resources, and DWR got a big chunk of money as well in the fall sale to start new projects.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hear from Resources.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. Patrick Kemp from the Natural Resources Agency. I'll just add a few comments onto what Mr. Dewey and the Treasurer have talked about. At the Natural Resources Agency, at the time of the bond freeze and since then, we've had over 4,000 existing projects that are fully funded and moving forward. These projects are through 60 different bond programs in 19 different departments. So since the freeze, when we have activated and restarted every existing project we had, which is fully funded through the end of this year. So we're moving forward. We're continuing to plan for new projects in all of our different programs. So when the event we have more new project money coming in, we can move forward to have new projects hit the ground running when the cash hits. In addition, we have also been out there working hard to get what are called the private bond placements going. We had a very successful with Solano County, with the Solano County Land Trust, where 29 projects were funded for $16 million, and are continuing to work to find these opportunities as we can to fund our projects within the Resources Agency. We're very appreciative of the $1 billion in new cash that's coming in to fund the existing projects plus new ones moving forward, and we look forward to working with Finance and the Treasurer's Office to prioritize and move forward with those projects. Thank you, sir.
So some specific questions I'd like to ask regarding the administrative staff. How are you, the pacing of funds coming out is different than it has been, as Mr. Dewey stated. So you have to watch your administrative budget so as not to exceed 5% over time. How are you handling that, since it's a slower process?
Yes, it's been a concern. We have, through the agency, advised people not to backfill bond positions because it's kind of, we have two pressures going. We have over 4,000 existing projects moving, which require staff to monitor and issue checks. And
how many?
Over 4,000 projects in the entire agency. We have lots of little projects, which require staff time to do. So we're continuing to do that. We have staff continuing to develop new projects to look forward, but we can't fund any of those yet. But we're also at the same time trying not to fill positions so we can extend out our admin money, which is the point I think you're getting to. We're trying to make the 5% pool last through the end of the project.
Right. You have to sort of restrain the...
We have done that, sir. I mean, in my agency, in my individual office alone, we had three bond vacancies. We haven't backfilled. We've left them open. And we've just been, because we haven't been pushing to go forward as much as we've been monitoring what we have and moving and making sure those projects are doing what they're supposed to do. But yes, it's a concern, and we hope we're being as prudent as we possibly can be, and we're just driving that message because the Resources Agency itself is for Prop 84, 40, 50, and 12 is the oversight body, and we've been driving that message home through both the auditors and through us.
Okay, good. Thank you. And then having to, rather than front-end, back-end financing, we're doing it front-end and not having the PMIA loans. How has that impacted your workload?
It's changed how we do things. We have, and when it first hit last year, when we were doing with essentially working with the Treasurer's Office on and Brian spoke of the mix of Build America bonds, taxable bonds, and the double tax-free bonds. We had to really look at each project individually, and each project was essentially funded individually then to see which silo, in essence, it fit in, and if the whole project fit in that silo. So that was a great deal of workload. We learned a lot then. And I think we're moving forward now, so we're, again, as Mr. Dewey said, we're trying to find projects that fit each category before we work with the funding in it. So we know this is purely a Build America Bonds project. We know we can put it there. We weren't doing that before because we just didn't have the experience. Now we've learned a lot. I think it's going to make moving forward more efficient, but it drove a great deal of workload compared to what we used to do with the pooled money account, where we grouped projects together after we'd already funded them, because there was no pressure to get the money out. The money was already out. So it's been a challenge, and I think that the three organizations have worked very well together to move forward, and we're reacting the best we can and actually planning ahead. I know we've worked very hard to see which projects fit better in which silo, which should really make when we get to the paying the bills end of it, much more efficient.
So, I mean, I assume that it takes much more work in a certain way now than it used to.
Well, I would just add it's been a learning experience for all of us. It's been a whole new process doing this, and we're all kind of figuring it out as we go. But I think we're getting closer to getting a process in place. We're working on how do we make the the surveying of the departments, reporting the needs, identifying different types of projects, fitting them into those silos as we go, and be able to plan ahead, not just to react to individual bond sales, but to say, okay, we have these needs going out X number of years. These are the types of projects. This is when they need the funding, and it's how to collect that information from the departments that doesn't, drive them crazy, and gets us the information that we need when we need it, so we can work with the Treasurer's Office to make sure that we're selling the right types of bonds, the amount of bonds we need to keep the projects moving.
I would just, I think, add to that to say that I think where the chair was going is it has increased our workload because we focused away from working as much on projects as we have on just trying to find the right mix of payment method to get the bonds paid. So it's been. There's been a lot of workload in just that area alone, but I think we've gone over the hill. We're on the other side now, and we've figured it out through history and mistakes we've made in the past, and the system's getting much better. And I would think after the next set, it'll be much better because the surveying has been getting more refined. Every new survey we get from finance is more refined, and we're trying to find so we get everything in the right place. At first, it was just what cash do you need. Now it's what kind of cash you need, and does this project fit? And with the thousands of projects we have, it just, as soon as we get each one of them siloed, it'll make it much easier as we move down the path. But yes, it has been a great deal of workload.
And finally, the price of land may be coming down due to the economy. Does the department take advantage of that to look into purchases? Is that something that's feasible? During the Great Depression, there was much land purchased at very reasonable prices. Is that something we can do now? Do we even have the cash, hope to have the cash available to take advantage of that if it comes up?
Acquisition, I agree with you about land coming down, and your history is very good there. That's where state parks acquired a lot of their just beautiful pieces of land was during the Great Depression. We currently are not doing a lot of acquisitions because there's not job creation. We've done it. We did a nice acquisition in the January because we leveraged a lot of federal funds, but there has been very little acquisitions going. I wish we could, but with the way the priorities are currently being used, acquisitions are not a priority, sir.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any questions or comments on this panel? The next one is the NGO. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, and we'll bring up the second panel. We have with us, and let me make one correction, Tina Andolina. Your papers say she's for the Trust for Public Land, but Tina's actually with Planning and Conservation League. Not that she was embarrassed by the other title, but we just wanted to make a correction. Chuck Mills, California Council of Land Trust. John McCall, Sonoma County Agricultural Preservation and Open Space District. And please begin.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Ruskin and members of the subcommittee. I am Chuck Mills, California Council of Land Trusts. I want to first thank the subcommittee, the Budget Committee Chair, and staff for scheduling this oversight hearing, which we're viewing as an opportunity to quickly review what the status of bond-funded environmental protection and resource conservation projects are from an on-the-ground nonprofit point of view, and in light of the bond freeze initiated almost exactly 16 months ago. Finally, we'd like to briefly address challenges and opportunities in the short term and long term for resources as California's economy hopefully begins to rebound. As is the case with most public benefit sectors within the state, California's conservation community has lost ground over the last 16 months, both literally and figuratively. Job losses within the environmental protection and resource conservation nonprofit community have forced numerous NGOs out of business or right to the brink. Sadly, this is often happening in those small communities hit hardest by the ongoing recession. As an example, the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy has been forced to eliminate a third of its workforce over the last several months, contributing to the record unemployment rate in Ventura County. There's not only jobs lost, but critical institutional memory that has been sacrificed and will take years to rebuild. Further, with California's dependency on bond funding to advance the vast majority of our state's water, recreation, and ecosystem restoration projects, many environmental and conservation nonprofits find themselves scrambling to put together a budget that can support their next fiscal year while also sustaining community relationships that they've built over the years for their conservation success. Like all infrastructure sectors, these nonprofits rely on new projects to sustain their existence. The bond freeze continues to jeopardize that foundation and deprive local communities of new opportunities to enjoy local parks, improved water quality, and other tangible public recreation benefits. However, I would be remiss in failing to acknowledge the absolutely essential lifeline that has been thrown to these projects and organizations since the subcommittee convened on this issue exactly a year ago today.
I didn't hear that, your full sentence, that last sentence.
I said, however, I would be remiss in failing to acknowledge the lifeline that's been thrown to the conservation and environmental protection community by this subcommittee and other agencies since this committee convened exactly a year ago today. First, with the tremendous support of the Natural Resources Agency, the State Treasurer's Office, and the Department of Finance, as we've heard here today, all projects that were in progress at the time of the freeze are moving, and we are pleased to report from on the ground that these entities are getting reimbursed for work already completed. Resources in the Treasurer's Office, as Mr. Kemp noted, were also key to creating an innovative financing mechanism which allowed more than 24 conservation projects to also move forward. And it's important to note here that by creating that financing mechanism, which are referred to as the private placement bonds, that freed up $16 million in bond sales that were then able to go to other worthy conservation projects. In late 2009, with the support of the Natural Resources Agency and the Department of Finance, a handful of new projects identified as state priorities by the State Coastal Conservancy, Sierra Nevada Conservancy, Wildlife Conservation Board were conditionally approved. This allowed these projects to take full advantage of significant matching funds from the federal government and private foundations and get some folks back to work. Finally, the hard work of this legislature and the subcommittee have supported the Voice for Resource Conservation and Equity issues, these projects and organizations, and ensured a seat at the table. Actions taken by the subcommittee chair and the budget chair last year provided for much needed clarification on the new rules of the game, as it were, and prompted the organizations represented here, along with California State Parks Foundation, to work with the Assembly budget chair to pass AB 1364, which was signed by the governor, and provided some modest but necessary protections for all projects that were frozen by the freeze in 2008. In short, our community is hurting but continues to persevere. We have jobs to fill and a tremendous opportunity to advance significant conservation priorities, as the Assembly budget chair recognized. Once enough bond capital is available to start some new projects, I know my colleagues will speak more to this issue. So I want to thank the subcommittee, the State Treasurer's Office, the Natural Resources Agency, and the Department of Finance for hearing our voice during these tough times, and encourage what could become a multi-year dialogue in this respect to sustain all facets of infrastructure, including our state's natural infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Tina Ann Delano with the Planning and Conservation League. I want to first echo what Chuck said about our gratefulness at the effort that this committee and the resources agencies have put into getting funding out the door and getting projects restarted. It's made a world of difference over the past year from where we were a year ago today to where we are today.
Well, I appreciate your kind remarks, but I can assure you that we really appreciate more all that you do to supplement the work of the state. Without all your work, we would have very severe problems, or I should say more severe problems.
Absolutely, and I actually wanted to dig a little deeper into that point and talk about the jobs that are related to the natural resource infrastructure and the restoration work that is done on the ground. As this committee knows, the state has outsourced much of its restoration work over the past decades, and the voters have clearly made conservation projects and land acquisition, park acquisition projects a priority since the Proposition 70 passed in 1988 till Prop 84 passed. The voters have said very clearly that they want these projects to move forward. That allowed what was a thriving economic sector to be built to a large degree in rural communities throughout the state. And all of that came crashing down with the bond freeze in December of '08. And I want to speak to the Sierra Nevada as an example that we looked at very closely and what effect the bond freeze had on that economy. A survey that the Sierra Nevada Alliance did of groups affected by the bond freeze showed that 60% of all the NGOs in the Sierra Nevada were directly affected, 25% laid off staff, 2/3 laid off contractors, and that has indeed contributed to the record unemployment rate that we've seen in these communities. We are pleased to see the priority that's given to resource conservation funding as the bond sales have moved forward. And there is a conventional wisdom that every dollar spent for roads, for example, is going to create more jobs than in restoration. And we gave that a lot of thought when we were looking at the results of the surveys coming in, because there was such a high degree of unemployment. And in a little bit of research showed a University of Massachusetts study that showed, in fact, every dollar spent on ecosystem restoration and sustainable forestry actually creates more jobs than any other sector, including road building, construction, water infrastructure, you name it. For every $1 million invested by the state, 40 jobs are created if you're looking at watershed restoration. That compares to 14 to 20 jobs if you're looking at roads, and that's 14 for new roads, 20 for road improvement. And it kind of makes sense, because when you're doing watershed restoration, many of those dollars are going directly to employ the people putting the shovels in the ground. Road construction, you're paying more for materials, etc. So it's actually a better investment if you're looking at job creation to invest in these watershed projects. So we're pleased to see that is being prioritized. And I just want to speak briefly to the uncertainty that faces NGOs now with this, with the new rules without PMIB loans. It is actually very difficult to plan their budgets going forward without knowing that there's a steady stream. And the Planning and Conservation League, we lost a grant in the bond freeze, had to lay staff off, and we're very excited that we were just told that we're getting that funding back. So now we're scrambling to rehire and redoing our entire budget. It's a problem we're glad to have, that we do have to quickly go back and fill these positions. But it is the loss of skilled workers, and that's just my organization as an example. I know this is happening throughout the state, has been very devastating. Getting back up and running again is going to be a slow process. So I just wanted to bring that to the attention of this committee, and we appreciate the time and attention that this committee has given the issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McCall?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Sean McCall. I'm representing the Sonoma Ag and Open Space District today. It's a special district in Sonoma County, voter-approved sales tax income, been in place since the early 1990s. This outsourcing, if you will, of the conservation work of the state occurs both with the nonprofit sector as well as the local government sector as the district in Sonoma functions. I want to just, the important point I think in terms of what this district is doing here testifying is that even though sales tax revenues drop 25 to 30%, there's still funding for projects. And as we've learned, rarely are projects funded exclusively by one funding source. So as an entity that is still open for business, still trying to do good work, the question is how do we work with the state of California for the certainty and planning that Tina referenced. The steady hand that everyone provided over the course of last year and the bond freeze was greatly appreciated. We were here a year ago saying you can't even pay our bills, and that's been turned around dramatically. But it was a steady management hand, but there was something else that happened that I think may be more episodic and something we need to look at, and that is we had a combination of robust bond sales because there had been a year or so of no sales, the Build America bonds, the ERA funding, and a federal government that stepped up in its baseline budgeting for its agencies that had not happened in many years in the resource sector. So federal agencies, it's almost as we were sinking, the federal ship helped everybody, and so the nonprofit sector has survived this. So what I want to focus on are just some recommendations. I think you've already steered us towards what we would like to see as well, and that is there are several assumptions. One is this is a pay-as-you-go effort heretofore, at least for the next several years. We can't do the smoothing over that the PMA allowed us to do. So as we plan projects with our state funding partners, I think we're probably on a 6-month budgeting. It sounds like we can only anticipate bond sales in the spring and fall, basically, and we can kind of estimate how much that'll be, and we can kind of estimate, once we get the existing project backlog taken care of, what will be available. And so the rational planning around this has to include all the, well, not all of maybe, but at least if there's 4,400 projects, we have to have a mechanism where those who would seek the funds from the state or appropriations can work on the criteria that are going to be used to judge what gets prioritized. And what I'm bringing here today as one of the key criteria is where can the state leverage money? Excuse me. So we have a local public agency that has several, operating budget. How do we come to the state and say, here's the federal money for this project we can get, here's private money, what can the state bring to the table? Because the one thing that won't go away is match requirements. And this is my greatest concern, that you as a legislature have already appropriated a huge amount of bond money that doesn't have any money behind it. This goes back to 2008. How do we look at this backlog of legislation, budget action, and figure out, okay, well, yeah, we still mean this. This is where we should prioritize. So that's a factor. And the other is more opportunistic, that we will lose in this calendar year matching opportunities if the legislature, or if we can't work closely in this effort that finance is developing. How do we provide that input? How do we bring that to the table? There's too many jurisdictions and agencies and projects to ever put them all on a list, but anything that we can do to help organize our sector, to help bring the nonprofit community into this dialogue would be greatly appreciated.
Well, you anticipated the question I was going to ask, and that is how can you, and that is the request for you to help us understand how you think prioritization might best work. And I think if you can work closely with committee staff, giving us all the information and insights that you have, we can liaison with finance and the treasurer's office and resources and make use of your insights.
Just quickly, two things happened last year. One is we had to organize as a community in a way we never had before. We all had gotten a lot of funding for our projects around the state, and we're busy doing our work. And all of a sudden, we had to start gathering data regionally about how many jobs were lost, who wasn't getting paid, et cetera. So we can't speak for the entire community by any stretch, but we can help organize. The other thing is, we planned around, basically, over the last 5 or 6 years, around issuance of big competitive funding pots of money. RFQs were, there was a year-long process where you could kind of count on once a year DWR would be doing a big pot of integrated regional water management funding or similar programs. That, I don't think that's what is being proposed by finance now. So how do we plan outside of a more predictable competitive system? I don't know.
If I could, Mr. Chair, I want to thank Mr. McCall for raising this issue so directly, because the thing that has troubled me as I hear finance talk about how we're rationing bonds is that I don't see a system that takes the things that you've just raised into consideration nearly to the extent that ought to. Yeah, we're in triage mode. We all hate that. But at least we can triage in the way that preserves matching funds and jobs and prioritizes, and we're just not doing it. So I'm glad that you're inviting that kind of feedback so that as we move this budget package forward this year, perhaps we can direct finance a little bit to be smart about the way we triage. Certainly, if we're losing big chunks of matching funds, I mean, that ought to go very quickly to the top of the list.
And I think we need to, I'm sure Finance would welcome our working with them on that. We can start acquiring information, accurate and useful information about triaging options, and then work with Finance. As they mentioned today, as Mr. Dewey mentioned today, they're beginning to develop new methods. They want them to be transparent, and so I would imagine they would welcome constructive work between our committee and them and the community to do an even better job of adjusting to this new situation. And we've made progress. I remember the shock of those hearings a year or so ago, but we need to continue making this the most rational adaptation to the current situation that we can do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Just
Mr. Silva.
Just a comment. I know at the city level, at the county level, and here at the state level, people are coming in my office. They want more. They want more projects. They prove this when they vote for these bonds. But then they turn right around and they say, oh, by the way, we'd like you to cut our taxes. We want more with less. Well, guess what? The public's going to be getting less with less. The money's not there. And we can vote all the bonds that we want, but they come out of the general fund. And I have educators that come in and say, for every dollar you put in education, California gets back 12. Well, sometimes I have to tell them what I tell my wife. We can't afford to save any more money. The money is not there. And I know that it would be nice to have all these projects. I think it'd be great. But to raise the taxes to pay for them is 2/3 of the vote. The state of California is not willing to give that up. Yet at the same time, they're voting for bonds for all these programs, infrastructure, but nobody's willing to pay for it. And that's where we are right now.
But my good colleague, Mr. Silva, these are bonds that have already been approved by the voters. So
I realize that.
We're not talking about new taxes or new bonds or anything like that. We're talking about carrying out the will of the voters in some very difficult circumstances. So I generally agree with that we can't afford to keep saving like that, because I have a similar recurring conversation in my household. But this isn't that situation.
But we sell the bonds, and I know that we're going to have a heck of a time selling the bonds in June. They'll probably be up around 6%. And the ratings are going down. People don't want to buy them. Yes, the public wants these programs. They voted for the bonds, but we can't pay for them. That's reality.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity to have this discussion today. I think that the challenge as we start, and I want to thank you for bringing up issues that have not, I believe, have not been considered in some of the funding priorities in terms of setting those priorities. And the challenge I think we have is giving direction to a number of agencies. One is giving direction to the Treasury Department. The other one is giving direction to the different departments that are making the decision as to which roll out first and how to set priorities. One of the issues that you raises is leaving dollars on the table, in particular right now the federal funds that are available. We also need to make sure that as we're looking at that, we're looking at what other communities have in terms of having put dollars on the table. Because it is important that I think that we try to move things as quickly as possible, create as many jobs as possible, but also I want to agree with Mr. Huffman. We don't want to be leaving federal dollars returning and then getting them reassigned to other states. So that's my biggest preoccupation with how we do things. The state is really not in a position to be managing all of these funds that are coming in well, and so we're having to redesign how we do things. And your comment is well taken. the big projects once a year, I don't see that happening. And I've been urging my local government representatives to start breaking things into smaller pieces. And those pieces that are ready to go, to roll them out right away, because the more that we can do that, the bids coming back are much better, number one. Number two is you put people to work right away. And three, part of the economy is public confidence. And the more that there are people out of work, it erodes public confidence, and the state suffers because we don't get the taxes we need. So it really is a cycle. And so I guess one of the pieces of advice would be to try to break things up as much as possible and stay as flexible as possible. And then we need to figure out how do we set priorities within to not have dollars left on the table, but also to make sure that the state, as much as possible, is distributing funds across the state, so that we're not just rewarding those that are ready to go, that have the federal matches, and not picking up projects in other communities that may not have the local match, for example.
And this question, and I think this is important, is I don't mean to criticize finance on not dealing with this, because what we're talking about is how many reps do we have in Congress? All of them are moving appropriations requests right now that they would have been able to move 2 or 3, 4 years ago through certain agencies. So we don't even, I mean, we have to get that information to you as best we can, and to finance.
Thank you. With this, we'll conclude this bond oversight section. It's been very helpful hearing from you in the previous meeting. We'll continue to work on this, as we discussed, to make our new method of operation as rational as possible and as opportunistic as possible and necessary. So thank you, and with that, we'll go to the next panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next issue, I think. Oh, the next issue rather than panel. This brings us to item 3720, dealing with the California Coastal Commission and the State Lands Commission, the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission, known as BCDC. This is an issue. Welcome. This is an issue that has been brought to our attention because the Department of Justice is proposing now something new and unusual in the way things would be done to essentially convert current general fund clients into billable clients, and having funding allocated directly to agencies for their legal services. This is, in a strict sense, the decision on this budget item is not in the purview of this committee. It's in the purview of Subcommittee 4 and the entire Budget Committee. But I wanted this brought here because of the potential effect on agencies who are in the purview of this committee, resources agencies, and especially those public lands agencies, independent agencies, and what effect this could have. And I thought it was important that we discuss this. Sub 4 had a hearing on it yesterday. I appreciated that Chair Arambula invited me to sit at that committee, which I did, and he is invited to be here this morning. His schedule may or may not allow him to attend. But with that, I think it's really important that we take a look at this item. This is an informational item only. And with that, please begin. And let me say from the beginning that I appreciate that the DOJ is making a good faith effort to deal with certain funding issues. But our interest is in whether the methods that have been suggested to deal with these funding issues are really in the long-term interest of certain agencies and the public's desire to see those agencies protect the environment. So I want to work with you to evaluate the efficacy of the processes that you're proposing.
Mr. Chairman and members, thank you. I'm Dave Harper on behalf of the Attorney General, and I appreciate the invitation to appear before your committee and face your wrath on this issue. So you talk about a process that's new. Well, it's essentially new to some of our general fund clients. The concept of billing general fund clients for legal services has existed for many years within certain sections of our budget.
Right.
And as kind of way of background, when we provide legal services to our clients, we're talking about defense work primarily. One of our clients' agencies has been sued. We're representing them in that action. If that client is a special fund department, meaning that they're supported by fees or certain revenues, like DMV, for instance, they pay us for those services on an hourly basis. If it's a general fund client, traditionally we've had general fund money in our budget to represent those clients. Last year, as part of the budget cuts that our department incurred, we lost about $30 million all fund sources in our 3 legal divisions and had to abolish about 130 attorney positions. And so starting this July 1st, we simply have fewer resources available this year than we had last year, and we're struggling to try and find a way to continue to provide the same level of services. What we've noticed is that unlike the relationship we have with our special fund clients, there's a bit of a disconnect with our general fund clients in how that workload is managed. So if you're a general fund client, we believe in some instances you view our services as free legal services on your behalf because the money isn't in your budget, it's in our budget. And so there's that fundamental disconnect of the client trying to control the level of services they use from the Attorney General's office. We think if we can change that relationship and have all of our clients pay for our services, kind of irrespective of their fund source, we start to bring an ability to manage that workload and hopefully to bring our budget back into balance.
And I think one of the concerns that many of us have is in the matter of independent agencies, how do we maintain the independence of those agencies? Will they, having the Department of Finance, an arm of the administration, in between an agency and its rights to representation, maintain the independence of that agency, or will it lead to a lack of independence, and will it lead to an erosion of their functions? Having heard yesterday the committee testimony in Sub 4 and given this a good deal of thought in my own experience and knowledge of these issues, I believe that there is a great danger and a probability that in terms of moving this process to involve independent agencies, that it's not a prudent move and will lead to the deterioration of the independence of those agencies. So I welcomed Chair Arambula's statement yesterday at the end of that section of the hearing, where he said he wasn't satisfied with the nature of the safeguards and the processes and would take a further look at it. But appreciate your remarks, and before I make further remarks, I want to hear from people on the panel and also from people who are here to give their testimony on this issue today.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, I think first of all, I would potentially disagree with the definition of independence here. If you have an entity that comes before the administration and the legislature for funding in any given year, they're not truly independent. They're always going to be beholden to somebody for funding of their budget. So whether that funding exists in our budget or it exists in our client's budget, the level of risk is the same. The Department of Finance has the same level of control, and at the end of the day, they make the final decision on what is the level of resources available to any one client.
You're missing the bigger picture. I mean, the bottom line is, if you've got agencies, resource agencies that are already operating on a shoestring budget, and when developers with a contested project line up to sue them and they have to think, can I afford to defend this lawsuit? You're talking about a dramatic difference in outcomes throughout the state. And, I mean, I want to hear from the other witnesses on this, obviously, but that's the big picture that you haven't spoken to.
Right.
And that is why this is an absurd idea that needs to be stopped right now. But let's hear the witnesses.
If I might just quickly, so in the context of that description, if a client is facing a new lawsuit and needs additional resources, the process they have to go through is the same as the process we would have to go through to get the additional resources. It's simply, do we go to an issue, a public policy issue in sub 4 to ask for additional resources, or is that public policy issue better addressed here before you, where you have jurisdiction over the client's budget to begin with? In any event, we're going to need additional resources to do the work. It's just a question of who comes before what subcommittee to get those additional resources.
You can't tell me that it will not have a chilling effect on the ability of these resource agencies who have strapped budgets right now to simply defend themselves. And you can't tell me that it won't have a corresponding increase in lawsuits from developers, because they simply know that it's going to be easier for folks. Take the State Lands Commission. Finance is sitting there. It's going to be much easier for the person sitting in that seat to say, sorry, we can't afford to defend this suit. And that's going to be the mantra every single time, and the developers know that. And we're going to see dramatically different outcomes throughout the state. I mean, that's just politically, that's obviously what's going to happen if we do this. And it doesn't matter internally how one goes about securing approval for the AG's office to represent them currently. If you force this to be as you have proposed here, we're going to get different outcomes.
And I think if there weren't going to be a different outcome, this wouldn't be being proposed. There's obviously something different in the cards, or we wouldn't, or there wouldn't be a different proposal for a different method, and especially in regard to certain agencies. There's a difference between, I think, between a department that is a direct department of an administration and an agency that is at least semi-independent, and that the people of the state have said we want this agency established to protect certain of our assets. I said yesterday, and I know we're having our discussion now prior to it, but I said yesterday that in sub 4 that there's an old saying that the power to tax is the power to destroy. And I liken it here because I think the power to stand between a person or an independent agency and their right to legal counsel is the power to destroy that agency. This is a very fundamental right in the balance of power and in the world of real politics. And that is really what we're looking at right now. Mr. Silva?
Mr. Chairman, that same exact argument can be made for the other side of the fence. When you have a developer that goes against a commission or an agency that continues to make law on their own, and they challenge it, they have to go to court. Developers go bankrupt because they can't afford to continually go to court over the same item. So my colleague made an excellent argument, but I think the same argument applies to the other side of the fence.
But what we're really talking about, Mr. Silva, is whether the developer in that situation can assume that the agency they're getting ready to sue will defend itself, or whether the developer can posture with lawsuits knowing that because of this new rule, there are going to be an increasing number of cases where the agency just backs down and relents or enters a friendly settlement. And that's what I'm talking about with different outcomes. That shouldn't be what decides the outcome. In a dispute over a permit or a project, it should be the merits. And both sides should assume that the other side has the ability to defend and represent itself in court if it's forced to. That's going to bring us to resolution on the merits. This is going to distort the system fundamentally, and we're going to get outcomes that have nothing to do with the merit.
Mr. Uppen, I've always found you to be a very fair person. I think that you'll understand this, that if the same commission has lawsuit after lawsuit and they're overstepping their bounds, I think that this is unfair to a developer. And you have a government that has deep pockets that can defend themselves in court. You have a developer that the owner of the project has put his watch and his home and everything he owns into that project, And a lot of times they walk away from a suit because they can't afford to sue. So it works exactly both ways. And I know you're a very fair person, and you see the other side also.
But, I'm quite familiar with this issue. The actual legal funds spent by DOJ per year in Coastal Commission action is very small compared to most agencies. It has not been. It isn't the Coastal Commission or these other agencies that have kind of broken the budget. It's not they who have done this.
How many court actions are brought against the Coastal Commission on a yearly basis?
I don't remember the exact amount, but I can tell you it's not many. I carried a bill last year dealing with this, and I know it's not many. The Department of Justice has to be very discerning about when it will take legal action, and it is not. The cases brought by DOJ each year over the last several years are not that frequent.
Would we be able to get that information?
Sure, I'd be happy to get it for you.
And what about, what about if we have tort reform where the losing side would have to pay all court costs?
Well, we're trying to deal here with an immediate
Mr.
budget
Huffman,
item.
you're an attorney. Yeah. What do you think of something like that?
We do have that already in lots of different types of litigation, but we also have penalties for frivolous litigation. So if either side is engaging in practices in the courts that aren't based on the merits, judges have the ability right now to slap their hand. I don't think that's what this is all about. And I guess what I'm wondering is why just these agencies in the proposal? I mean, if we're going to do this, what agencies continue, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, what agencies continue to enjoy the system as we've known it?
Teresa Calvert with the Department of Finance. This is not limited to resources agencies. This would be a shift of all general fund clients
Okay. How
at
about
DOJ.
Department of Corrections?
They would be included in the shift,
So you're
correct.
proposing everybody?
All of the general fund clients, all of DOJ's clients would become billable. Right now, the special fund clients are billable. We're going to convert those general fund clients to billable and then allocate general fund to them to pay DOJ for their services. So DOJ will have a uniform billing system across its clients, general fund or special
How about
fund.
and the special fund would be the same way? So
Correct. Special fund clients are already working on a billable status.
You're proposing that any state entity that is sued would have to go through this new hiring.
Correct. This is not unique to resources agency departments in any way.
I had a misunderstanding about that. Thank you.
Mr. Gilmore.
Just to clarify, having spent 3 decades with the California Highway Patrol, it is a special fund agency, but any suit that's brought against the patrol and is settled comes out of that agency's budget. Just for a clarification, my colleague, Mr. Silva, asked about the court actions brought against the commission, Mr. Chair. I would be interested in knowing what type of regulations are targeted, if you will, or named in the suit on the commission. What type of regulations brings out the litigation, especially from developers? I mean, I think regulations in general in California, I think it's safely to say we're probably one of the most heavily regulated states in the nation, and it makes it very difficult to do business here, and especially those that in the building trades that are attempting to do projects. Our regulations make it very, very difficult, and oftentimes brings about a civil issue.
Well, just to briefly answer your question, and we can bring up, I think, the next group of people to answer. But the kinds of violations that I, for example, am concerned about are not small violations. They're not the violation that a particular single homeowner might do. We have had examples of entire developments being built without permits. We've had examples of sewage being spilled intentionally where there's no proper sewage permits, no proper sewage infrastructure. We are talking about the potential, when you have interest in desalination plants, when you have interest in very large-scale developments, we're not talking necessarily about developers who put their watch in as their final investment. We're talking about developers who are very large developers, who are major corporations who have interests in developing the coast, and who, if there's no incentive for them to follow the law of the state, have the deep pockets, therefore, to proceed to develop as they wish, especially if the law becomes hollow and the impediments to them become negligent. So it isn't, my concern is not the small homeowners who wish to build a fence that shouldn't be built, but major development forces that really need to obey the law or to be subject to the law. And you can't be subject to the law if there's no ability to enforce the law.
And Mr. Chair, kind of picking up on Mr. Silva's suggestion about, can we find ways to reduce litigation and save funds? We could have a very interesting discussion in this committee about creating some administrative penalties for these agencies so that they could enforce the law in some of these situations without having to go to DOJ to invoke litigation. So far, that's been off the table. That's been a third rail.
What Mr. Huffman is discussing, I'm familiar with.
Sure. I think instead of going to DOJ and saying, hey, we need you to bring an enforcement action in the courts, we could give the Coastal Commission and BCDC administrative penalty authority so they could do it themselves. And you don't have... What's that?
An agency that sets the rules and regulations to also implement the fine and be in control of it.
Well, there is precedent for that. So what you're saying then is we don't want to give you the resources to go to court, and we don't want to give you the tools to enforce the law out of court. Therefore, we're basically saying you don't enforce the law, and that's not okay.
But Mr. Evans, we can't take away the rights of the public. The chairman just said a fence that shouldn't be there. Well, how do we know that fence shouldn't be there? Maybe the homeowner feels that it should. There's two sides to this story, and I live in a coastal area, and I hear all these horror stories about what the Coastal Commission has done. People don't have the money to fight it, and they just go along with it. Well, that's not right.
Well, there are also stories about developers in the coastal zone from the other perspective, but the bottom line is if there's a dispute about whether a fence should be there or not, and you're telling one side in that dispute that they're not going to be able to afford representation, again, we're back to the fact that you're changing the outcomes.
Let me bring up the next group of panelists.
Mr. Chair?
Oh.
Catherine Freeman with the I'm so sorry.
We just need to hear from the panelists.
Oh,
we haven't heard from them yet.
They're not. If they have something to offer, they weren't actually going to. If you do.
If you'd like us, this is Catherine Freeman with the Legislative Analyst's Office. We can talk about the administrative civil penalties issue, but also Drew Soderberg from our office is here to discuss any questions you may have about the LAO proposal on this issue.
Yeah. Okay.
Drew Soderberg, Legislative Analyst's Office. We do feel that the governor's proposal has merit because it will give the state a way to allocate the already limited legal resources to agencies in order to be able to procure DOJ legal services. However, we do recommend some changes to the proposal. Specifically, we recommend that requests over $1 million be subject to review by the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. Also, we've recommended that the money for legal services as a technical issue be appropriated somewhere in the budget. And finally, we have also recommended that this process only be used for a single year. We feel that enough data would be collected within that year to be able to make permanent allocations in agency budgets after that.
All right, thank you. Now if we can bring Oh, did Finance want to?
Just one thing, Dad. We have been working with the LAO on the recommendations and generally concur with the recommendations, but are working out a few technical details. I also want to note that we are open to suggestions and how to structure this so that there is that level of independence or, transparency and allocation. So we are open to suggestions in doing this, and we just want to note that we are not taking away resources from departments, but allocating the limited resources that are currently in DOJ's budget to the departments to manage. But we are open to suggestions on how to improve this proposal.
All right. Thank you.
Matt Almy, Department of Finance. I also want to emphasize in discussing the independent commission issue that there are several independent boards, such as the Air Board and the former Waste Board, that were special funded, and therefore were already subject to this existing special funded process, where the legal services were funded out of their own budgets. So that's already taking place under independent boards that are special funded already.
All right. Yeah.
Given that that comment, are there lessons to be learned from looking at how they, what happened with their litigation costs and how they were managed? Because I understand why this is being proposed. I mean, you lose 130 attorneys in an office, you got to figure out how you're going to be able to allocate resources. I'm sorry, that's a lot of people. So what you try to do is to figure out who's using what resources, and it's a tracking method. But I also understand some of the concerns that are coming from my colleagues. So I guess I'm trying to get a feeling for, if we've done this, if we've shifted organizations from being so that it's within their own budgets, do we have a track record, something we can look at to say, here's what happened when we moved them from one category to another, number one, if they were moved, and two, if they weren't, what I'd like to hear from those departments, what the impact has been to have their accounting-wise, have they had any impact on their litigation and their ability to defend themselves, their ability to litigate doing this method?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think anecdotally what we know is when a client controls their budget, they are more judicious in the use of our services. So with our special fund clients, we have a good working relationship with them kind of on a day-to-day basis. And that's not to say we don't have a good working relationship with our general fund clients. I think the Commission, the Coastal Commission, and the state lands are probably two of the best examples we have on a day-to-day working relationship with our general fund clients. But when, in a general sense, if you don't pay for our legal services, you may overuse our legal services. When we have a special fund client who needs additional resources, we're able to go with them to finance or to the legislature if necessary and help them advocate for the additional resources. On the general fund side, we've got Department of Corrections as our primary example. In the last 2 years, we've had BCPs before Sub 4. In both houses, Sub 4 has approved the funding request, and in both instances, the Budget Conference Committee has rejected the BCPs and instructed us, we don't want to continue to pay for litigation, we want you to settle this stuff. Well, as the attorney for the client, we can't compel them to settle anything. We can work with them and maybe discuss strategies, but at the end of the day, we've got to represent their interests, and we've got to do it to the best of our ability. We don't have a choice to pick and choose one client over another. It is a resource issue from our perspective.
Thank you. With that, I'd ask the next group of panelists to come up. Yeah, and if please make room. There's quite a large number. If you could make room for the. I'm going to make a special request of all of you. We have fallen significantly behind in our agenda, and also many of the points that I think you wish to make, some of us on the committee have already made. Yes. In interest of time, because we do have a long agenda and many of them that need votes today, I would really ask you to truncate your remarks, consolidate them, and make perhaps only the remarks that you think have not been made on the by members, or that are necessary to concisely answer certain things that have been said.
Thank you, Chairman Ruskin. Following your direction, I am Sarah Christie, the Legislative Director for the California Coastal Commission. I do want to point out that, as you heard yesterday in Sub 4, this is not a cost savings. This does not save any general fund, according to the Department of Finance. So all this, we're still talking about general fund money. We're just taking general fund money and putting it into a different account and then creating a new allocation process for how that general fund money is spent. So please, this is a budget subcommittee. Let's not forget, this is not a general fund savings. The point that was made earlier about it's just no difference whose line item, whose budget it's in, how it's line itemed, that's not accurate either, because the way the Department of Justice currently gets budgeted, they get, as I understand it, a lump sum for the Public Rights Division, which part of it gets allocated to the Land Law Unit, which serves a number of general fund clients. Those general fund clients' litigation needs rise and fall on different cycles, and one year you may have a lot of litigation for state lands. Another year it may be Dogger, another year it may be Coastal Commission. So there's some fluidity there that the Department of Justice and their client agencies can benefit from in terms of how that funding gets moved around as needed. I do also want to point out that none of the justifications given for this funding shift apply to the Coastal Commission. We have never had a case returned for lack of resources. We have never had to hire outside counsel for lack of resources. We work very closely with the Department of Justice. We settle those cases that make sense to settle, and we litigate those that make sense to litigate, in some cases all the way to the Supreme Court. This would absolutely gut the Coastal Act. It would render the Coastal Commission a paper tiger, because everyone would realize that regardless of how strong our law is, if we do not have the ability to implement it in a way that we can back up through litigation and enforcement activities, that there's essentially no incentive to actually follow the law. So I really thank this committee for taking the time to discuss this today. I concur with everything that was said by the chair and Assemblymember Huffman, and I would urge you to send a strong message to your colleagues in Sub 4 that the Land Law Unit and these independent commissions in particular should simply be excluded from this proposal. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for having me here today and for taking a look at this. And I'm going to agree with the things that Sarah Christie has said. I am Sarah Wan. I'm a California Coastal Commissioner. And I want you to understand, by the way, Mr. Gilmore, Assemblyman Gilmore, the regulations that we're dealing with is a law. It's the California Coastal Act, and that's what I'm charged to enforce. And that is a very, very specific. And this proposal is the most serious threat to this coast since the passage of Proposition 20 by the people of this state, and it jeopardizes both the independence of the Commission and our ability to make reasoned decisions to protect the public's ability to access the beach and this state's coastal resources. We simply can't operate if there's no certainty as to our regards to our ability to have legal representation. Make no mistake about it. One general funding pool, which is way too small to be adequate, means we have to compete for the funds, which may be gone by the time we seek them, and we don't control the timing of the lawsuits against us. And I can't go in, as I think Assemblyman Nava said yesterday, can't go into a closed session being told, well, you can't be certain about whether you're going to be able to defend yourself. And then we have to, each applicant, okay, can figure they can sue us. And this is what Assemblyman Huffman said. They'll say, well, they can't afford to sue us, and I'm going to be told in closed session, you're going to have to make a choice as to which part of the coast you want to sacrifice. So frankly, I hope it's not your part. Saying yesterday that if the funds are depleted, all we have to do is go to seek a deficiency allocation is simply ignores reality. There's no way to know if that allocation will be approved. So how do I operate under that sort of threat? For us to make policy decisions as to what we need to save and what not to, we need to have some certainty. This will only encourage more lawsuits and more expenditure of funds, and that's frankly wasteful. Yesterday, the representative from the AG's office said that this isn't going to save money. So why are we doing it? As far as I'm aware, the Commission has not abused the system, and we've been told that we haven't abused the system. We use about $2.5 million on average a year, okay? And we're careful. We settle a lot of lawsuits. This will definitely hamper our ability to carry out the mandates of the Coastal Act. And equally important, we don't have fines and penalties. And I might add that there are many other agencies, most other agencies, even regulatory agencies, do have that ability. In fact, I believe we're probably the only one that doesn't have that ability. So we have no way to raise monies. In fact, I believe that if we had the ability to raise fines and impose fines and penalties, which would only happen if there were a public hearing. We don't do things behind closed doors. If we would have fines and the ability to impose those, it would be in a public hearing, and the parties involved have a full chance to make their argument in front of a full commission, a commission 1/3 of which you appoint. Okay, so you actually have a say in that. And that having those fines would be important to helping us, but we don't have that. The only thing we have is our ability to defend ourselves when someone is suing us, or to take action when somebody has cut off a mountaintop or blocked your ability to get to the coast. And we need to have the certainty that we can have this when we are making our decisions. We also shouldn't be having to go to the Department of Finance for their involvement in this. They are not charged with making those policy decisions. We are. That's why we have a commission. That's why the public granted us that right. This basically, the purpose of this is to undermine the intent and the existence of the commission, and we view this as just doing that. It will destroy what this state has, which is the finest coastal program in the world, in my opinion. You have a coast of a state with the largest population in the world, but the best protected state. I don't know in the world, I mean in the nation. You have it. And that is a result of what the people of this state did and what this legislature did. And I urge you to protect that and continue that process, and to do, as Sarah Christie said, to send a recommendation to say to the sub 4 that you believe that the land law section of the Department of Justice should be exempt from this proposal. That's the only thing that can really work.
Mr. Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Wan, I fully understand the Commission is established by law. My questions were directed and were, the Commission also has the ability to impose regulations as well. And my question was and is, how many suits are brought against the state or the Commission as a result of the regulations, if you will?
As far as I am aware, I have no authority to impose any regulations. All I have the authority to do is carry out the specific mandates of the Coastal Act. I cannot impose regulations. And we could go through a process, but as far as I'm aware, I've been on the Commission for almost 15 years. We've never adopted any regulations.
This is Susan Hand, Chief Deputy Director of the Coastal Commission. The Commission does have adopted regulations. Mainly they're procedural, how the Commission operates through how votes are taken, how LCPs go through processes, our permit and filing fees. In most of the lawsuits that we have really aren't on the regulations. They're on the Coastal Act implementation of the policies in the Coastal Act. So the regulations are more neutral.
Okay, and specifically you mentioned permitting under your regulations.
Right. So
how many, what type of suits are brought against the Commission because of those permitting processes would be more specific? Thank you.
The Commission, we didn't come today with this specific description of all the different lawsuits, but the types of lawsuits that the Commission is served with have to do with violations. The Commission institutes those, or their cross suits on violations. Permit conditions, non-compliance with permit conditions, and a variety of other broader range issues. And then most of the, well,
They do not bring lawsuits that I'm aware of, and as I said, I've been there for a long time, based on the permit process.
no, there's not the process.
It just doesn't happen.
It's the conditions that people don't agree.
Which are based on the Coastal Act, not on the regulations that she's talking about. They're based on the Coastal Act policies.
Very good.
A lot of it is based on the interpretation of those. And you can say, oh, we're lily white. Well, there's people that want to build, and they can't because of the conditions placed on their permits, and they're not happy with it. The only chance they have is to litigate.
Those are the policy decisions I'm talking about that the Commission is charged to. There can be a disagreement about the interpretation of those policy decisions. That is correct. The applicants would prefer that we did not impose conditions on them. And this is the policy decisions that the Commission is charged with making.
Unfair conditions.
Depends on whose side you're looking at.
I'm going to ask the remaining witnesses to be very brief. I do appreciate you've come a long distance, but if you could be brief, I'd appreciate it.
Very briefly. Will Travis, the Executive Director of the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission. What we're doing here today is hostage negotiation. The problem doesn't exist here at this table with these agencies. It exists with the Department of Corrections. That's where all of the money was spent that the Department of Justice doesn't have. We share the same lawyers at the Department of Justice. We negotiate with them when we need their legal services. If we don't need services in any one particular year and the Coastal Commissioner of State Lands does, often it's the same individuals. We've got a system that works very, very well now. And by the way, we do have the authority to impose civil penalties and administrative penalties. It works very, very well. The challenge is if you start to divide that up, we have a six-fold difference in the amount of legal services we may need from one year to the next. We don't have any control over when we will need that. We were sued once sometime in the last century. We needed services then. Most of our legal services are carrying out the enforcement of the law where there are violations. And we've got a system that works very well now. If there is a reason to change it, and I believe that the motives of the Department of Justice are absolutely correct. You want accountability. You want transparency. The problem exists with corrections. Try it out there. See if you can make it work there. And if it works there, then bring us back and say, look, guys, you're worried about something that you don't need to worry about. We figured out how to do it. So we have questions as to how it will be implemented, not necessarily objections to the goals.
Paul Thayer, Executive Officer of the State Lands Commission. I want to first point out that we haven't had an opportunity to bring this to our commission to get their perspective on it, but as a staff we have a number of concerns here. We're not a regulatory agency. We're the landlord for the state that's charged with managing all of the underwater property. And so we don't act through permits, we act through leases. We authorize development to occur in our lands. And so we generally aren't sued as often as we're filing litigation to make sure one of two things is happening. Either A, the state is getting fair market value and the rent that has been, that the lessee has promised us, or to stop trespass and misuse, unauthorized use of state lands. And the problem with this proposal is that it sets out it'll end up setting out very clearly how much resources we have to carry out that job. And the public perception of that resources and the limitation on it means that the public will tend to discount our enforcement ability. Some examples of what we've done through that enforcement in the past. Several years ago, we were forced to sue Hansen, which is a company that dredges sand from San Francisco Bay. They weren't paying us what they had agreed to pay us. Through that litigation, the settlement, we brought $40 million to the state. That is roughly 28 times the amount of money that we use each year, $1.4 million for enforcement efforts. So we got a very good return from that. Last year we brought a total revenue to the state of $381 million. We need the enforcement ability to be able to be sure we obtain that money. We often receive the money that the state is owed through negotiation without having to file litigation, but it's the threat of the litigation that enables us to do that, and we think we're about to reach a settlement with a peer owner in Southern California without having to file that litigation, but without that threat, we never would have reached the agreement. We also have situations where, again, there are these unauthorized uses of the land that interfere with the public's use. We had a situation up in Tahoe where some of the landowners were harassing members of the public who were using the state-owned beach there. The commission authorized a suit. We never had to file because once that authorization occurred, we were able to negotiate with the property owners and reached a great result. We are trying to solve the legal expense problem ourselves, but we're sponsoring a bill dealing with to authorize us to be able to administratively impose fines. We know, I talked with Travis earlier, that his litigation expenses were dramatically reduced when that fining authority was given to the BCDC, and so we're hoping to have the same result and actually reduce then the expenses, legal expenses that we have. So in summary, again, we think this proposal will reduce our ability to obtain the proper revenues, the fair market revenues that are owed the state, and with our ability to stop things like a few years ago, the O'Learys with their illegal use of boats and living aboard out in the Sacramento River right here with the sewage going into the water. We went after them because of that, using our enforcement authority, and we don't want to have that threatened.
Okay, with that, I'm going to bring this section to a close. Yes, did you wish to?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I might, just a couple minutes to comment on a couple of the statements that were made. The issue of no cost savings, just for the committee's edification, if you rank our general fund clients by number of hours used, the Coastal Commission is called the 6th highest client from general fund hours. The first 5 being the Department of Corrections, the Department of Mental Health, the Franchise Tax Board, the Governor's Office, and the Board of Equalization. In every instance, we've returned work to them this year and authorized to hire outside counsel. So the fact that it hasn't happened to them before doesn't mean it's not going to happen to them potentially by the end of the year. We are running unlimited general fund resources, and we do everything we can to manage our general fund resources kind of in a total concept. But again, we are simply $30 million lighter than we were last year, $16 million general fund. The second point, if we have to if we have to come to you with a deficiency or we have to authorize our client to hire outside counsel, it's going to cost the state something. So there may not be a direct savings dollar for dollar in the proposal today, but cost avoidance can be considered a savings by some members in the legislature. It's just a question of how you want to define cost savings. Third point, the issue of our budget structure. The division, the Public Rights Division, is allocated a pot of general fund. Of that amount, $5 million is in this section. Of that $5 million, $2.2 million is for the Coastal Commission, $1.3 million is for the State Lands Commission. When that money runs out, when we've allocated the number of hours that we spent that money, we're going to have to come to you and ask for a deficiency, or we're going to have to authorize the client to hire outside counsel. Whether we come to you for a deficiency or the client comes to you for a deficiency, somebody's got to come to you to ask for additional resources. We don't have them in our budget any longer.
I just want to say, I think we heard a very good idea a little earlier, which is if such an overwhelming piece of this problem is the Department of Corrections, let's try it there first. As far as I know, none of the Department of Corrections litigation actually brings money into the state. It's always a question of how much we're going to lose. And many times it's just a stubborn prison bureaucracy that it takes federal court receivers to turn around. And so maybe requiring them to actually think in a dollar and cents mode about their actions would actually bring some positive change and save the state money. But what we've just heard from the State Lands Commission, for example, is very compelling. Why would we want to mess with that at all when we've got something that's not only vindicating public policy, but is actually revenue positive for the state. That makes no sense whatsoever to me. So I just want to be very clear. I'm going to oppose this in every way I can. There's no way I would ever support this proposal. I would support it if it applied to the Department of Corrections.
Ms. Caballero, then Mr. Gilmore.
I just had a real quick question. The lineup of the number 1 to number 5 clients, was that over a 1-year period, or is this over a 10-year period? What's the analysis?
So that's based on the actual hours from the 2008-2009 fiscal year.
Mr. Gilmore?
Very briefly, the question is for the representative of the AG's office. Correct me if I'm wrong, from CDCR, the vast majority for suits brought against the department are from inmates themselves. Is that correct?
Without actually seeing the actual data, I'm going to say you're probably correct, that it's due to conditions of confinement. And I think the other issue really boils down to whenever the Department of Corrections exercises kind of independent discretion, independent decision-making, they're going to be challenged by somebody.
Thank you.
With that, let me just... my opinion is in concert with Assemblymember Huffman, and I think this is a very serious proposal in terms of its negative impacts. I do not, while this proposal has been brought for fiscal reasons, I do not think the fiscal reasons really apply in terms of these of the land law unit, and I think the government needs to not only look at things in terms of conceptual, of an item conceptually. We need to look in terms of reality. I think the reality is that this is unnecessary in terms of the land law unit, and that it will have a chilling effect on the ability of these agencies to enforce the law of the state of California. My personal preference as chair of this committee is to eliminate the land law unit from this proposal. I cannot support this. I think it is really deleterious to the work of these good agencies. And with that, I thank you all for being here.
Mr. Chairman, members, thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion.
Thank you.
This discussion obviously generated a lot of concern and passion, and so I'm going to have to make adjustments as we move forward. If the Department of Conservation folks will please come forward, and as they do, I would ask for a motion from the committee to pass the vote-only calendar. These are items that were on the consent calendar but which have been removed so that certain members can vote no on them. Would someone move the vote-only calendar, which consists of the Coastal Commission item and the Coastal Conservancy item? Is there a second? Please call the roll.
Ruskin?
Yes.
Caballero? Gilmore?
No.
Huffman?
Yes.
Silva?
No. That passes. Thank you. We now, just give me 1 second to 3480. If the department, we're going to, because of time, I'm not going to introduce these items. We're going to just begin with the proposal from the department.
So I'm Bridget Luther. I'm the director of the Department of Conservation. The department consists of 4 divisions: California Geological Survey, Office of Mine Reclamation, Land Resource Protection, and the Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal. I believe before you are 2 proposals which you might have questions about. One is the orphan facility remediation, and there was a concern about it being ongoing funding. It is not. It is $1 million a year for the next 4 years to clean up environmental and safety hazards related to abandoned oil facilities in the state of California, of which there are 59. We have broad support on this from the oil industry, and they know that they need to do this. These are facilities that we have no owner, which we can go after for responsibility to clean up these facilities. They're eyesores as well as environmental hazards. Were there any other questions concerning this proposal?
Well, the proposal will directly raise fees. Is that correct?
There's an assessment that goes to the oil industry, which would be about 0.4 cents.
And what happens when the program ends? I know the program is not ongoing, but will the fees be ongoing?
So the fees will end when the program is finished.
All right. Are there any anyone else wish to make any comments? Members, any comments or questions? My recommendation is to approve as budgeted with trailer bills stating that any fee increases that are a result of this proposal are restricted to a 4-year period. Do I have a motion? Second? Call the roll, please.
Ruskin?
Yes.
Caballero? Yes. Gilmore? No. Huffman?
Yes.
Silva?
No.
That passes. Brings us to issue 2, the geothermal staffing.
So, interestingly enough, geothermal provides 45% of all the renewable energy for California, a little over 5% of our total electricity uses. And in the last 4 years, we've been seeing a significant increase in the number of operators as well as the number of wells. We have offices overseeing geothermal in Santa Rosa as well as El Centro, and they're understaffed. And so we would just be asking for additional staffing for those 2 offices, because we see geothermal being more and more important as we get to our renewable standards portfolio, and there will be increased interest. We know that over the next 10 to 20 years, there will be more geothermal projects in the state of California. So increasing the number of positions by 2 and permanent positions to staff the 2 offices that oversee the geothermal regulations.
All right, I have no questions. I think this is supported by a valid workload. Are there any comments or questions? May I have a motion to approve the budget proposal? Please call the roll.
Ruskin?
Yes.
Caballero? Yes. Gilmore?
Yes.
Huffman? Yes. Silva?
Yes.
All right, thank you. That passes. This brings us to an item that I'm recommending we hold open because it concerns bonds, and I think we should look at all bonds in total before we make recommendations, because of all of the issues regarding bonds that we heard in the first item heard today. But I would ask you for your thoughts on this.
So my only thought is the California Farmland Conservancy program is highly leveraged. For almost every dollar we get, it's matched by either a local match or federal funds. So it's a very effective program. It's not a lot of money. It's $35 million a year. So I would just suggest that those are one of the programs that is also highly leveraged. And most of the deals, all of the deals have some sort of local support when it comes to the Farmland Conservancy program. So I would just like to make that point.
All right. Any comments? Any public comment? You can use that mic there.
Mr. Chairman, members, Christopher Turnell from Conservation Strategy Group here on behalf of the Tulare Basin Wildlife Partners, Marin Agricultural Land Trust, Audubon, California, and the Nature Conservancy. The California Farmland Conservancy Program is a vital program. Not only does it provide critical protections for farmland, but also for the natural resources that are sustained by those very protections. And acknowledging that you're going to have this as part of a larger bond discussion, we urge your favorable consideration during those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from committee? Seeing none, thank you. We're going to hold this open and have it in a part of the larger discussion, as was just stated. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item, 3500, Department of Resources, Recycling and Recovery. There are 2 issues. First issue, Issue 1, SB 63, Implementation, Waste and Recycling Program Reorganization. This concerns the general reorganization with the absorption of the Waste Management Board. Please begin.
Actually, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be before you today. Probably would characterize a little differently. The Integrated Waste Management Board and the Division of Recycling came together to help provide streamlining opportunities for recycling and solid waste services throughout the state. I was before you probably in my former role as chair of the Integrated Waste Management Board, so it's a pleasure to share with you the progress that we've made in the short 3 months since SB 63 was signed and we started working on the integration of the programs. And we've done a lot to get to where we are. New leadership team, new faces, new webs, integration of programs, and I'm happy to report that we didn't lose any of our client payments or paychecks in the process. So anyway, I did want to share with you some of what we have accomplished since we've been here and the commitment that we have to continuing the process of open transparency that we enjoyed in the board structure. Having been a former board member, I can attest to what that board structure looked like and how it interacted effectively with our stakeholders. And we have committed ourselves to continuing that open stakeholder process. In fact, have continued our regular meetings with our stakeholders to hear permits in an open process with the decision makers in the room at the table, and have continued the process of program and policy evaluation and workshops with our stakeholders' full participation. In fact, the Division of Recycling has seen the opportunities that exist for them as well to participate in the same kind of process and stepped up to our way of including our stakeholders last month, and we were very surprised by the first foray into an open stakeholder process with more than 80 participants in the webinar. About 40 were in the room, and about 20 participated via phone. So for a first opportunity for the Division of Recycling, we were quite pleased that they were taking advantage of that process to discuss how the convenience zones are working, how the processing fee was calculated this year, and payments. So we see that that's an opportunity moving forward to continue that open, transparent process. We've also maintained a strong commitment to environmental protection and enforcement. The movement of our agency or our department to a different agency has not changed our mission or purpose or our strong commitment to environmental enforcement. We still operate under the same statutes and law. And in our leadership team, I'm very happy to report that we have a strong leadership team that came with us from the Integrated Waste Management Board to continue that strong enforcement. We do work collaboratively across many state agencies, so I think that us residing in the Natural Resources Agency now is not going to hinder our ability to work collaboratively with the California Environmental Protection Agency or continue to work with the Department of General Services on EPP or green building as we have in the past. We've had these collaborative efforts with CEC, and we will continue to work strongly and collaboratively with the Waste Board or with the Water Board and OEHA and Cal EPA. So before you today, I wanted to launch into our budget. It's been a somewhat difficult budget to bring forward to you. Oil, e-waste, and tires seem to still be working. We do have significant revenue shortfalls in the Integrated Waste Management budget. And as you are all painfully aware, the economy has affected that, and our revenue is down. The budget before you today reflects an $11.7 million and an elimination of 40.5 PYs. Since a proposed fee increase within environmental programs areas has been limited to those that garner general fund revenues or reductions, we're faced with having proportional reductions between CalRecycle, or the Department of Resources Recycling and Recovery, as well as the Department of Water Resources Control Board and OEHA, as well as Cal EPA. None of which comes without consequences to these affected organizations, but the reductions are fair, and in the case of the Water Board, consistent with statute. We recognize that change in our agency, we'll still have an opportunity to work collaboratively with them. The 40.5 PYs that are eliminated CalRecycle, obviously, the first 18 of those were eliminated, associated with the elimination of the board. However, the remainder of the cuts are from a combination of support functions and a number of staff positions that provide technical analysis as well as local support. Our highest priority still remains public health, safety, and the environment, and strong environmental enforcement. We also value the experience and benefit of maintaining a knowledgeable and experienced staff for implementing all of our programs. And it's a core value of our organization as we approach these difficult decisions that we do the utmost to avoid staff layoffs. Regardless, this is not where we wanted to be, and frankly, as the economy turns around, we hope that that our revenues will increase as well. That's why we have chosen to partially address the revenue shortfall with a one-time loan from the Electronic Waste Recycling Act of $1.5 million. This loan is only a stopgap measure until the economy rebounds and IWMA revenues increase. The decline in IWMA revenues has not yet hit the bottom, though. We are continuing to experience revenues coming in lower than anticipated, and we expect that there will be further reductions in our budget in the coming year as well. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And there are actually, I thank you for your remarks. They stretched over two issues, actually. So just for the clarification for the committee, the first issue is the general implementation of the reorganization. The second issue, which we'll get to after, are specific budget proposals across a variety of departments. Are there any questions or comments regarding issue 1, which I'm recommending we approve as just the general thrust to getting the reorganization underway?
Just a question.
Yes.
Have we found any general fund savings to this rearranging of deck chairs?
Well, the general fund savings that we had anticipated are reflective in our budget, which is the elimination of the board positions.
If I may, Ken DeRosa with the Department of Finance. The Waste Board did not have any general fund prior to any consolidation. So there has been no general fund. There was no general fund impact anticipated as a result of SB 63, positive or negative.
Correct. Actually, the savings that were associated, I'm sorry, I didn't speak clearly. The savings associated with the elimination of the board, we knew were the elimination of the board positions, which is roughly $2 million. We have not moved any staff members. We have not purchased any equipment or furniture. But our staff and our obligation didn't change. So we anticipate that as we move forward in the coming years, we will find efficiencies and savings by combining our programs.
Well, I certainly share the chair's recommendation for these two items, and I just want to apologize. I'm sorry that we put you through this charade for the last year. Your agency has been doing very important work. You've been doing a good job. You've had to go through this make-work realignment because you were collateral damage on a political issue that was not your making. And I think you're doing the best you can with it. But I'm sorry we've had to put you through this charade.
Well, thank you. I look at it as an opportunity and a challenge. So, and not necessarily in that order.
With that, I would ask for a motion on issue 1. Moved and seconded. Please call the roll.
Ruskin?
Yes.
Caballero? Gilmore?
Yes.
Huffman?
Yes.
Silva?
Yes.
That passes. This takes us to issue 2, and happy to hear questions, of course, from or comments from members, and any comments from others. But what I'm proposing is that we hold this open so that we can hear from all the departments impacted by the IWMA cuts, so that we can make the best decision possible on all of these cuts to see if we think they're being done in the best way.
And if I could add, Mr. Chairman, we think that the proportional reductions are the fairest way possible. We have worked collaboratively with the Water Board in looking at the number of landfills that are actually still open and active that they're responsible for, and have, over the last year and a half, had these discussions with them regarding our shortfalls in the IWMA.
Now, are the proportional reductions you're suggesting, are you doing them by across-the-board proportions, static proportions? Or?
They are.
And do you think this takes into account, often when one does across-the-board cuts, one takes the risk of not making adjustments by priorities or by the workness that may be different in one group compared to another? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it wouldn't be appropriate for us to evaluate one priority over the other. We work jointly with the Water Board on permitting the landfills, and that's the function of AB 1220, which they have a direct appropriation from the Integrated Waste Management Board. When that bill passed, there was approximately 250 open and active landfills, and we're down to 148 now. So the workload is diminished, and they have the statutory authority to charge for the services to backfill that funding. So we believe that the proportional cuts are the fairest way to do that rather than evaluate the priority of one over the other.
And that'll be one of the things that we'll be looking into as we take a look at it. Any other comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Caroline Godkin with the Analyst's Office. We would note that the Governor's approach to address the structural deficit in the fund takes account of expenditure reductions, some funding shifts, and also loans. And in total, we do consider this to be a reasonable approach. With regard to the proportional reductions, the approach may have merit. However, if you do have concerns with any particular reduction compared with another, you do have the opportunity to either prioritise those payments, to shift where the cuts are, or either identify an alternative funding source to offset any of those cuts in the fund.
Thank you. And any other comments or questions? This is an item we're holding open. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This brings us to our final item of the day with 4 issues. Item 3540, the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. Starts with the LAO's magnum opus. We'll begin with the LAO report. I would ask you to consolidate your comments.
I will try.
I've read the report. Hopefully other members have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Caroline Godkin with the Analyst's Office. Our recommendation with regard to CAL FIRE's e-fund budget is essentially one of legislative oversight. Our recommendation doesn't get into what CAL FIRE should spend the e-fund budget on, more about how the legislature can exercise its intent with regard to what is spent. And overall, this is a general fund neutral proposal. We're not proposing to increase or decrease what is spent from the general fund in the budget year. So I'll briefly explain how CAL FIRE's fire protection budget is currently structured, and then I'll provide some examples of where we have concern of how the e-fund is currently being used, and then I'll make recommendations for improving the legislative oversight. And again, this is a general fund neutral proposal. So CAL FIRE's fire protection budget is around $1 billion per year. Of that, $725 million comes from the general fund, and the remainder is from reimbursement from the federal government and from local entities. And CAL FIRE has responsibility for fire protection on about 1/3 of the state or the state's responsibility areas. So that's for wildland fire protection. There are 2 main components to CAL FIRE's budget. Firstly, the base budget of around $500 million per year. And the base budget is intended to pay for day-to-day firefighting costs, including salaries, maintenance, and equipment costs. And included in this base budget are the costs of what's referred to as initial attack. That is generally firefighting wildland fires within the first 24 hours. The base budget is subject to annual appropriation by the legislature through the normal budget process. The second component is the emergency fund, or what is referred to as the e-fund, and this is intended to pay for the costs of large incidents. So that's generally the costs of incidents that go beyond 24 hours and that generally exceed the capability of one CAL FIRE unit. And costs included here would be unplanned overtime, costs of additional equipment rental, and also the cost of the inmate crews. The E-Fund appropriation in the budget is a single line item, and it is an estimate of what the expectation of the cost of these large incidents will be in any fiscal year. Budget language allows for this to be augmented at any time by the Department of Finance. So, for example, in the current year, the appropriation in the Budget Act was for $180 million, and this is now being augmented to $240 million by the Department of Finance. So in looking at the E-Fund, our approach is that if there were no large fire incidents in any given fiscal year, in theory, expenditures from the E-Fund should be zero. So in looking at actually what is spent from the E-Fund, we found a couple of examples where the E-Fund was being used for non-large incident costs. Firstly, CAL FIRE has an aviation program of helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft and small air tankers. Under a long-standing budget practice, 1/2 of the cost of this program has been charged to the base budget and 1/2 has been charged to the E-Fund. So again, in a situation with no large fire incidents, 1/2 of these aviation costs would be charged to the E-Fund. CAL FIRE's base budget currently pays for 3 firefighters per engine, and under an executive order, CAL FIRE have added 1 firefighter per engine for the fire season for the last 3 years, again funded through the E-Fund. And finally, there is a seasonal fire station in the Tahoe Basin that is staffed and completely funded through the E-Fund. So given the addition of these non-large event expenses into the E-Fund, the practical implication is, again, that when there are no large fire expenditures, expenditures from the E-Fund would not be zero. And one example I'd like to bring to the committee of the problems that can be caused with this is the recent contract for the DC-10 large air tanker. So in 2006, CAL FIRE entered into an exclusive use contract for a large air tanker during the fire season. And this contract was entirely funded through the E-Fund and was never appropriated by the legislature. As part of the 2009 budget, the legislature reduced the E-Fund appropriation by $7 million and directed CAL FIRE to cancel the contract for the large air tanker, which the department did immediately. However, as the fire season progressed, CAL FIRE determined that the arrangement for the DC-10 was not meeting their needs, their firefighting needs, and entered into another contract, again funded through the E-Fund. Now, whilst CAL FIRE did act at all points for both contracts within its administrative authority, the use of the E-Fund mechanism meant that the legislative intent with regard to this contract was not followed. So turning now to our recommendations. For the budget year, we recommend that the day-to-day expenses that I described be moved in full from the E-Fund into the base budget. So the base budget appropriation would be increased and the E-Fund appropriation would be decreased. Again, it's general fund neutral. And the reason we suggest moving these expenditures in full for the budget year is that CAL FIRE are currently making preparations for the fire season, which will span 2 fiscal years. And in order to provide them the certainty they need to plan now, we would move these appropriations in full. However, we would recommend making these all a 1-year appropriation and directing CAL FIRE to return for the 2011 budget year so the legislature can assess each of these proposals on their merits. The one exception to that is the base aviation programme, which the legislature has already reviewed half of, and so that CAL FIRE would not be required to provide BCPs for that. In tandem with that, we would recommend the legislature adopt language to specify what expenditures are allowed from the E-Fund, and that also that all day-to-day firefighting costs should be included in the base budget and should be subject to legislative review. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments from committee? Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Crawford Tuttle. I'm Chief Deputy Director of the department, and with me today is Chief Ken Pimlott, our Deputy Director of Fire Protection. We look forward, in the interest of time, we'll suspend our opening remarks and be delighted to respond to any questions the committee might have.
All right. Thank you. Well, this is a very an interesting proposal. I'm proposing that we hold this open. The thread of this proposal will be seen as we discuss some of the issues that will follow. And And I think this is food for thought to consider as we move forward in the budget year, deliberations, but that we hold this open now. Any other thoughts? Yes, sir.
John Silva, Department of Finance. We would just like to note that Finance agrees with the proposal that the LAO has presented. We would just like to work with them on the statutory language to make sure it meets all the department's needs to fight, to respond to the E-Fund emergencies.
All right. Thank you. With that, we'll move on to issue 2. Oh, I see.
Great.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, Mike Richwine has joined me from the State Fire Marshal's office, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have on this proposal.
So this is a proposal. The governor's budget is requesting one position and $169,000 in special funds. The page says $169. That would I would thank you for even bringing us the smallest in special funds to accomplish the implementation of green building standards. This position would be responsible for promulgating building fire and safety regs for new green building designs and products. Did you have any comments you wanted to make?
Just very briefly, and then I'll ask Chief Witchrein to amplify. I think it's our understanding that the green building standards are very important, and they're a very fast-moving and dynamic process that they're working through. And I would understand and acknowledge that the legislature would want to make sure that our fire safety standards keep up with that process. And so the proposal before you today, in short, is just to make sure that we're able to keep pace with the important movement forward on green building standards, and that those standards do meet full fire safety building standards in the future.
I do have a few questions. How do you make decisions? Well, actually, before I go into that, let me. Did you have any questions?
No comments.
Okay. The questions that I want to ask and pertain to this the subject of new vehicles, which is a subset of this issue. And I'm doing this partly as part of an overall emphasis across departments by budget committees this year as a way of assuring that we're holding down costs as much as possible. So I just wanted to drill down into the part of your request to purchase a vehicle for the new position. General questions, how do you make decisions on when to purchase a new vehicle? Wouldn't a pooled vehicle or state rental be adequate for this? And do you survey the existing fleet for underutilized vehicles?
Certainly.
And as I said, we're not zeroing in on your department, but this is something we're doing across the board.
Certainly. And given the importance of this issue right now, what I'd like to do is ask Mike to give you a little more detail about how our vehicle usage would help meet the mission of this particular proposal.
Thank you. The use of this vehicle, the position that's identified, would be responsible for traveling throughout the state from Siskiyou to San Diego to meet with our constituencies, the California fire chiefs, the fire prevention officers, industry collaboratives, training officers to discuss these new building technologies, alternative fuels, and their impact on fire safety and the code development process. We envisioned that there would be extensive travel with this vehicle, and so having that vehicle utilized and assigned to that position would be the most cost-effective and efficient way, in our opinion.
So your justification is that it would be more cost-effective than using a leased or
well, let me just add, I understand that is the concern of the committee, and we are doing that analysis now, and we'll be happy to come back to you with that information as we complete our analysis.
That'd be great. That'd be very helpful. And I'm going to suggest that we keep this item open so that we can make, when we dealing with new vehicles, we can be consistent across departments in the approach that we take, and be sure that we're being consistent. Mr. Huff.
Thank you for honing in on that piece of this, Mr. Chair. And for me, I'm glad to see the department's interested, and it sounds like a worthy position to me. But it's very hard to make a decision on a request like this in isolation, because I know that we've got these building permit fees, and green building is affecting lots of different agencies. And I would need to think about what other agencies also have needs to engage on this issue, or are there needs at HCD that we need to balance against what's being requested by this agency. My guess is that we probably have more needs than we have dollars, and we'll have to think about the relative merit of their different needs. So hard to do in isolation. Thanks.
I'm sorry, I was distracted. I'm interested in hearing
what... I was just saying that I'd like to know what other agencies also feel like they need a piece of these building permit fees because of the green building standards. Hard to evaluate this one agency request in isolation to what HCD or others might need.
Okay, all right. With that, we'll hold that open and move to issue 3, which is the Civil Cost Recovery Program, which I understand is producing good results.
It is. Delighted to report. Obviously, the fundamental premise here is to, when appropriate, to recoup general fund costs of our response to incidents. And in order to do that, we do need a strong capacity to follow up and go through the full administrative and legal process, in some cases, to recoup funds that are owed to the state. And we think that this program has already proven to be a success, and we would urge your favorable consideration this morning.
And, well, yes, please.
Hi, Claire Frank, Deputy Chief in charge of the Civil Cost Recovery Program. I can go straight to the 2 concerns addressed in the agenda packet, if you like. The first is the contracts. These are contracts for expert witnesses that have forensic knowledge beyond our own expertise in fire cause, metallurgy, corrosion engineers, failure experts. We currently have about $90 million in case value that have expert witnesses assigned. You know, we bill the cost for these experts in our cost package. So if we win the case, the defendants pay the cost, and there's no impact to the general fund. If we lose, then there's an impact, and we need some capacity to pay the vendor. We haven't lost since the inception of the pilot program. So if there's, that's kind of the primer on the contracts, and if there's any questions on that, I can go deeper.
On vehicles?
Vehicles, this is one vehicle for a battalion chief position. This is a field emergency response position. So pooled vehicle and rental vehicle, they get mad when we drill holes in their vehicles and put light bars in consoles. So not to be flippant, but a little bit. So yeah, a Geo with a light bar. So the other part of that is we use the vehicle on investigations, and we use it to secure weapons, small evidence, and it would interrupt the chain of custody to make it a shared vehicle. So we can also do a cost-effective, we did do a cost-effective analysis too, if you want that.
Well, actually, having heard what you're going to do to the vehicle, I think that we could, I'm going to change the recommendation. This is in a different kind of dimension than the vehicles in general. It seems that you really do need to purchase this vehicle, so I'm going to recommend that we not hold this open, but that we approve this item in total.
I agree very much with that recommendation. This looks like a revenue generator to me, and I think we should support it.
So,
just a real quick question. How many miles do you usually put on a car before it's retired? A vehicle?
It depends on the mileage. If it's really hard mileage in terms of fire trails and off-road time, it'll make it to 100,000. But once we're looking at 6 figures because of the wear and tear on the vehicle, it gets.
I'm just curious.
Kind of dicey.
Okay. Thank you.
I think one other point I'd like to make is we're also not talking about highway miles. In many cases, these vehicles are going into very remote and relatively inaccessible areas, and so the demands on these vehicles are significant.
The difference between stop and go on freeway.
Yes, sir. So appreciate your favorable consideration this morning.
Any other comments? I think I would entertain a motion, therefore. Moved and seconded. Call the roll, please.
Ruskin?
Yes.
Caballero? Gilmore?
Yes.
Huffman?
Yes.
Silva?
That passes. And this brings us to the final item of the day, final issue of the day. Would you like to open on this, or I can describe it?
Well, what we'd like to do in just opening up this item, this is a very important issue, and we appreciate the legislature's consideration. The legislature has consistently supported this program in the past, and we look forward to working with you in determining the best way to see that this program moves forward. We appreciate the committee's approval of the reappropriations this morning. But we do need to think about how we're going to address this program in the future. I think that the multiple benefits of the program have demonstrated themselves, and it's timely and appropriate to us to consider how we should look at this program applied across the state where appropriate. And we'd be delighted to follow up with staff and provide additional information as they consider how best to proceed on this item.
Yeah, and my concern here is that I believe that when the legislature passed 1E, they weren't really concerned. They didn't really intend to use these funds to use funds for this. That they were constructed to be available for urban stormwater projects that can't get funded in any other way. My recommendation is that we fund this, but reject the Proposition 1E appropriation request and approve the reappropriation of Prop 40 funds. And,
I concur with that. I represent a district that is among the many competing for this, the stormwater funding, and I can't in good conscience reappropriate that. So I concur with the chair's direction.
Mr. Chairman, if you'd like us, we do have some additional information that we'd like to provide to the committee for its consideration, if possible, before it takes a final action on this question.
well, I intended to take final action now, so if you'd like to provide us the information.
Sure. What I'd like to do is introduce Russ Henley, who's our Assistant Deputy Director for Resource Protection, and Russ can give you a little more background on this question.
All right.
Thank you and good morning. I believe we have demonstrated well the way in which we can target our fuels management projects to provide the kinds of benefits that this section of Proposition 1E tries to target. Can understand some concerns about urban versus non-urban sorts of issues and such that seem to have come up. One of the larger questions in play is funding source, and appreciate the interest in reappropriating the Prop 40 funds. We have had some discussions on the Senate side about potentially looking at some other funding sources, such as Prop 84, to forward towards this. So we are planning to continue working on the Senate side with those discussions about alternative funding sources, and would like your consideration of holding this item open so we could further pursue those discussions and look at alternative funding sources for these activities.
You know, if another funding source becomes available, we can discuss it at that time. But I think the current proposal, while it could be argued falls within the letter of the law, I think contravenes the spirit of it. And I think we should stick with the spirit of it. And so at this point, to give you funding, I think we should approve the Prop 40 reappropriation, and then if there are other funding sources become available and you don't want to use Prop 40 funding, we can evaluate it at that point. There will be time. Is there public comment?
Chairman, members, Christopher Trinnell again, Conservation Strategy Group, this time here for Los Angeles County Flood Control District, as well as the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, very much in support of staff recommendation, and also we'd just like to concur with the comments of the Chair and Assemblymember Huffman. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Would entertain a motion to reject Prop 1E appropriation and approve reappropriation of Prop 40 funds. Moved and seconded. Please call the roll.
Ruskin?
Yes.
Caballero? Gilmore?
Yes.
Huffman?
Yes.
Silva?
That passes. This completes our work for the day. We will hold the roll open for 5 minutes or so, so that the member not here at this moment can add on. Mr. Huffman, you've voted on everything?
I think so.
Okay. And you, I know you both have. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay.